Hey everyone, I just wanted to give you an update on my previous video on inflation. The Labor Department just released their latest inflation numbers for June, so I wanted to give you guys a check-in to see where we're at. These recent numbers will affect your hard-earned dollars, and I will also discuss what to expect for the future. Hi, this is Jeff Wan, and welcome to my personal finance channel where I discuss wealth and all things pertaining to your financial freedom. In the latest numbers, we see that consumer prices increased to a whopping 5.4% in June compared to a year earlier. This is the biggest gain in 13 years since 2008. Consumer prices, i.e. inflation, are rising for a number of reasons. Our economy and inflation is a confluence of many ingredients. We see a supply-demand issue where the main driver was the booming demand that outpaced businesses from keeping up. Another factor that contributed to the higher prices for everyone was the recovery of prices in air travel, entertainment, recreation, and rental cars. This is not surprising, as all these services were really hit hard by the pandemic. By all accounts, we see a lot of Americans coming out of hibernation trying to get back to normal life. I mentioned in my previous inflation video that we rocketed up 4.2% in April this year. In May, we arrived at 5% inflation rates. Judging by recent history, these are the highest rates we have seen in a very long time. If you want to understand what inflation is, and how it's measured, and how to protect yourself, check out my video up there after this one where I break it all down in aspects that are easy to understand. You guys can really get a good grasp of what's happening to your hard-earned dollars out there. But in the meantime, if you're getting some value out of this so far, help me out with the YouTube algorithm by smashing that like and subscribe button. Getting back to the update, we see here in plain sight that year-over-year price increases have been skyrocketing at an alarming rate. The only difference between the headline Consumer Price Index in blue and the CPI in red is that the line in blue includes all aspects within an economy that is experiencing inflation. So I believe the blue line is a more accurate representation of reality. However, you can see both lines rising at an alarming rate. From the CEO of Compound Capital Advisors, Charlie Bolello, we can see evidence the unbelievable increase we have had in commodity prices last year. Looking at the first three numbers on the list, natural gas increased 107%, oil at 83%, and gasoline at 78%. These alarming percentage increases really puts the everyday consumer in a bind to make ends meet. In a separate report from the Labor Department, real average hourly earnings fell by 0.5% for the month. So on one hand, you have this massive 5.4% inflation increase, yet hourly pay fell by 0.5% for the hardworking American. Simply stated, many people are getting hit hard on both sides. Inflation is eating away at the purchasing power of your dollar, and Americans are getting paid less. We see by these two diverging numbers that Americans are falling more behind as they try to make ends meet. Their wages are not even keeping up or even remotely close to the inflation rates that we're having. In fact, even in this Bloomberg chart, even if you take out food, fuel, shelter, and used cars and trucks, it still looks like the worst inflation spike in almost 3 decades. On one end, you find the Federal Reserve telling the American people that this is temporary and not permanent. We can blame the rising rates on supply chain bottlenecks and demand for goods as the pandemic eases. However, we can't ignore that our very own Fed printed $2.2 trillion in 2020 and $1.9 trillion in 2021. Obviously, this extreme amount of money printing helps save our economy from the pandemic, but unfortunately, it has a direct correlation on the very high inflation rates that we're seeing today. We have 25% more money in the system, chasing a set amount of goods and services. With that, what can we expect for the future? Well, we can expect more money printing as Jerome Powell, our Fed chairman, just convinced Congress to continue our easy money policy. Continuing our easy monetary policy really makes me wonder if our inflation rates are temporary or are they here to stay? And will we ever go down to pre-pandemic levels of inflation? Though they are steadfast in saying that these inflation rates are temporary, they also acknowledge that the upside risks are increasing. It really makes me wonder, how could our massive inflation rates be temporary when our Federal Reserve has vowed to keep on printing more dollars and flood the system with more money? Common sense tells me that when we keep on injecting more massive amounts of money into our system, we will continue to have higher inflation rates in the future. Here, the respected macroeconomist Lynn Alden comments that the US in blue did more stimulus than Japan in red and Eurozone in black. She states that the US did more fiscal stimulus than Japan and the Eurozone, which helps our pandemic recovery growth. But we are also running into higher inflation as a result. As examples of how money chases a set amount of goods and services, we don't have to look further than the recent record housing prices that we've had. We see that home prices in May experienced the biggest annual increase in more than 2 decades, rising an amazing 24% higher than a year ago. Look no further than the stock market, as it continues to break its all-time highs over and over again. What really concerns me is that everyday hard-working citizens are falling more behind due to these easy monetary policies. We can lay blame to Jerome Powell and the powers that be. We can argue if we really needed to print that huge sum of money in the last 2 years. I believe that their intentions to help the economy and the American people are genuine. However, because of these actions, we see higher amounts of inflation that directly affects hardworking people today. I think Stan Druckenmiller, the legendary investor, said it best. I don't think there's been any greater engine of inequality than the Federal Reserve Bank of the United States the last 11 years. He directly accuses them of this wealth divide and blankly states that rich people like him are getting richer because of this, yet at the expense of everyday working people. So I hope you enjoyed this update. Please check out my other inflation video where I discuss what it is and how to protect yourself, as well as other topics that affect your wealth and financial freedom. And I'll see you on the next one.